At 82, I've lived through many changes in my life. But there's one decision I deeply regret: retiring too early and in the wrong way. Back then, at 65, retirement seemed like the promised land. No more deadlines, no more stress, just endless freedom. My financial advisor said I had enough saved up. My friends were all doing it. So I took the leap, handed in my resignation letter, and walked out the door for the last time. What a mistake that was. No one warned me about what would really happen next. No one told me about the hidden dangers that would slowly erode not just my savings, but my health, my purpose, and even my relationships. Looking back now, I can see exactly where things went wrong, and I'm sharing this because I don't want you to fall into the same traps. In this video, I'm going to reveal 6 critical retirement mistakes that I made, mistakes that completely transformed what should have been my golden years into a struggle I wasn't prepared for. From financial miscalculations that seemed minor at first but snowballed over time, to the psychological impacts that no retirement calculator can measure, each point reflects hard-earned wisdom that comes only from experience. These aren't just theories or textbook warnings. These are the real-life consequences I've lived through, consequences that have affected thousands of retirees who, like me, thought they were completely prepared but discovered too late that retirement planning goes far beyond just money in the bank. Stay with me until the end, because the final mistake I'll share is possibly the most devastating one. A mistake that more than 70% of retirees make without realizing it, and one that's almost impossible to recover from once you're deep into retirement. Understanding this hidden danger now could literally save your future self from years of regret, isolation, and unnecessary struggle. By the time we finish, you'll have a clear roadmap of what to avoid and, more importantly, what to do instead to create a retirement that actually delivers on the promise of those golden years everyone talks about. Now, let's get started with the first mistake. The first mistake I made, and one that I've watched countless others repeat, was retiring simply because I reached a certain age, in my case, 65. I remember the day vividly. My colleagues had organized a small party. There was cake, a few speeches, and plenty of congratulations all around. Everyone said the same thing: you've earned your freedom after all these years of hard work. What no one asked, not even me, was whether I was truly ready to leave my career behind. Not just financially, but emotionally, socially, and psychologically. Consider 2 men I knew well, both 65 at the time. Robert and Michael. Robert had been counting down the days to retirement for years. The moment he turned 65, he submitted his retirement papers, cleaned out his desk, and never looked back. Within 6 months, he seemed lost. When we'd meet for coffee, he'd constantly check his watch, not because he had somewhere to be, but because he had nothing meaningful to fill his days. Michael, on the other hand, took a different approach. At 65, he negotiated a part-time position at his company. 3 days a week, he continued doing the work he'd mastered, mentoring younger employees and maintaining his professional identity. The other days, he slowly built a life outside of work, volunteering, taking courses, reconnecting with old hobbies. By the time he fully retired at 70, he had gradually built a rich life beyond his career. 5 years later, the difference between them was striking. Robert seemed to have aged far more rapidly, often complaining of feeling useless and out of touch. Michael remained engaged, purposeful, and visibly healthier, all because he retired based on his readiness, not just his age. The truth is, your birth certificate is the least important factor in determining when you should retire. What matters is whether you've built a life beyond work that will sustain you, emotionally, socially, and yes, financially, for what could be 20 or 30 years of retirement. Looking back, I would have benefited enormously from a gradual transition rather than the abrupt cliff I jumped from. If you're approaching retirement age, ask yourself honestly, am I retiring from something or to something? If you don't have a clear answer to the second part of that question, you might not be as ready as you think. The second critical mistake I made was severely underestimating how long my retirement savings needed to last. When my financial advisor told me I had enough saved up, what neither of us fully appreciated was how dramatically healthcare costs would increase, how inflation would erode my purchasing power, and most importantly, how long I would actually live. At 65, I calculated my retirement based on living until about 80, which seemed reasonable at the time. Now, at 82, I'm facing a sobering reality. My money is running thin, but I'm still very much alive and potentially could live another decade or more. Let me tell you about Margaret and William, both of whom retired the same year I did. Margaret, age 72, was always cautious with money. When planning her retirement, she assumed she'd live to 95, far longer than the average life expectancy. Her financial advisor thought she was being overly conservative, but she insisted on planning for longevity. William, 74, based his retirement calculations on living to 82, the average life expectancy for men at that time. He withdrew from his accounts more freely, took that luxury cruise he always wanted, and helped his grandchildren with college expenses. Today, William is in a precarious position. Still healthy at 74, he's watching his savings dwindle while potentially facing another 10 to 15 years of life. He's had to move in with his daughter, giving up the independence he cherished. Meanwhile, Margaret continues living comfortably in her own home, secure in the knowledge that her cautious planning will sustain her no matter how long she lives. Dr. Sarah Jensen, a retirement planning specialist I consulted too late, puts it bluntly: the biggest risk in retirement isn't dying early, it's living longer than you planned for. Running out of money at 85 when you might live to 95 is a tragedy that proper planning can prevent. If I could go back and redo my retirement planning, I would have planned as if I had lived to 100. Yes, that means saving more, working longer, or spending less in retirement, but the peace of mind would be worth it. When planning your retirement, remember, it's better to have money left over than to run out of money with years of life still ahead. My third major regret about retirement was prioritizing financial planning while completely neglecting my health. I spent countless hours with financial advisors fine-tuning investment strategies, but almost no time preparing my body for the decades ahead. This oversight ended up costing me more than any market crash ever could. When I retired at 65, I was in decent shape. Not athletic by any means, but I could climb stairs without getting winded and enjoyed the occasional weekend hike. I told myself that with all my newfound free time, I'd finally get in shape. I'd join a gym, take up swimming, maybe even try yoga. But without the structure of work, those promises to myself kept getting postponed. 1 year turned into 5, and suddenly simple activities became challenging. Consider 2 women I knew through my community center, Patricia and Eleanor, both 68 when they retired. Patricia approached retirement with a comprehensive health plan. She scheduled a full physical before retiring, worked with a nutritionist to develop an eating plan that would support her health as she aged, and committed to a regular exercise routine. Nothing extreme, just walking 30 minutes daily and attending 2 strength training classes each week. Eleanor, like me, focused almost exclusively on her financial portfolio. Her health plan consisted vaguely of staying active without any specific strategy. When small health issues arose, a bit of stiffness in the morning, getting winded more easily, she dismissed them as just getting older. 10 years into retirement, the contrast between them was stark. Patricia remained vibrant, energetic, and independent. She could still play with her grandchildren, travel without assistance, and enjoy an active social life. Eleanor faced multiple chronic conditions that require expensive medications, limited her mobility, and eventually robbed her of the independence she valued most. What I didn't understand then but see clearly now is that health in retirement functions exactly like compound interest in your financial portfolio. Small investments made early, regular exercise, proper nutrition, preventive care, compound dramatically over time. Similarly, small neglects compound just as powerfully in the negative direction. Dr. Martin Levy, a geriatric specialist I should have consulted years earlier, explains the difference between being able to live independently at 85 versus requiring full-time care often comes down to the health habits established in the first few years of retirement. This transition period is a critical window that many retirees miss. If I could go back, I would have created a health plan as detailed and disciplined as my financial plan, understanding that without health, no amount of money can buy the quality of life I wanted in retirement. The fourth mistake, and one that blindsided me completely, was how quickly I lost both my social network and my sense of identity after retirement. For nearly 4 decades, I had been John the marketing executive. My colleagues were not just co-workers, but friends with whom I shared daily conversations, challenges, and achievements. When I retired, I assumed those relationships would continue unchanged. They didn't. The first few months, people called regularly. By 6 months, those calls dwindled to occasional check-ins. After a year, I realized with a shock that I had become an outsider to a world I once belonged to. It wasn't that my former colleagues didn't care. It's that daily connections require shared context, and I was no longer part of that shared daily experience. Even more surprising was how much of my identity had been wrapped up in my professional role. Without it, I struggled to answer a simple question: who am I now? This identity crisis wasn't something I had anticipated or prepared for at all. Take Thomas and Richard, both former executives who retired the same year. Thomas, 67, approached retirement assuming his professional network would naturally maintain itself. He made little effort to create new social connections, expecting his calendar would stay full with lunches and golf games with former colleagues. Richard, 70, took a different approach. 6 months before retiring, he joined 3 community organizations unrelated to his career: a hiking club, a volunteer literacy program, and a local history society. He deliberately sought environments where his professional status was irrelevant and where he would meet people with diverse backgrounds and interests. 5 years into retirement, Thomas had become increasingly isolated. His phone rarely rang. When he did connect with former colleagues, conversations were brief and superficial. They were still immersed in a world he no longer inhabited. Richard, meanwhile, had built a rich social network diverse enough that it didn't depend on any single identity or context. Dr. Emily Watkins, a psychologist specializing in late-life transitions, notes, the retirement transition often triggers what we call identity foreclosure, suddenly losing access to a role that provided not just social connection, but meaning and purpose. Without preparation, this can lead to depression, isolation, and accelerated cognitive decline. Had I understood this in advance, I would have started building non-work relationships and identities years before retirement. I would have gradually expanded my self-concept beyond my job title and cultivated communities based on interests, values, and activities that could sustain me through decades of post-work life. My 5th retirement regret was failing to replace the purpose and structure that work had automatically provided for decades. Throughout my career, I had clear goals to achieve, problems to solve, and reasons to get out of bed every morning. My days had rhythm and meaning built in. When all that disappeared overnight, I was unprepared for the void it left. At first, the freedom was exhilarating. I could sleep late, watch TV in the middle of the day, and do whatever I wanted. But that novelty wore off quickly. Within months, days started to blur together. Tuesdays felt like Saturdays, which felt like Thursdays. Without deadlines or responsibilities, time lost its shape and, surprisingly, much of its value. Worse than the formlessness of time was the gradual sense that I wasn't contributing anything meaningful anymore. After decades of work that mattered, at least to someone, I found myself in a strange existential territory where nothing I did seemed to make a difference to anyone. Consider Janet and David, both 71, who retired from teaching careers. Janet drifted into retirement without a plan beyond relaxing and catching up on reading. David, however, deliberately crafted his post-teaching life around 3 elements: learning, taking courses in subjects he'd always been curious about, teaching, mentoring at-risk youth twice weekly, and creating, pursuing photography, something he'd never had time for during his career. 3 years into retirement, Janet struggled with depression and a nagging sense of uselessness. "I used to shape young minds," she told me once. "Now, I just shape the dents in my couch." David, by contrast, had created a life with clear purpose. When I asked if he missed teaching, he laughed. I'm still teaching, just differently. And now I'm learning and creating too. Honestly, I don't have time to miss anything. Dr. Richard Lorenzo, who researches purpose and aging at Columbia University, explains the human brain is wired for purpose, for working toward meaningful goals and contributing to something beyond ourselves. When that purpose vanishes in retirement, it's not just psychological well-being that suffers. Research shows accelerated cognitive decline, increased inflammation, and even shortened lifespan. Looking back, I should have spent as much time planning how I would find purpose in retirement as I did planning how I would fund it. I would have experimented with different activities while still working to discover what truly engaged me. Most importantly, I would have ensured that my retirement included ways to contribute, to solve problems, and to feel needed, because these turn out to be not luxuries but necessities for a fulfilling life, regardless of age. If you're still watching this video and finding these insights valuable, please comment number 5 below to let me know you're here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I recommend you subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss any videos. Your support helps us continue creating good content to inform and inspire you. Now, let's move forward to the final mistake. The sixth and perhaps most devastating mistake I made, the one I alluded to at the beginning, was allowing myself to become socially isolated at precisely the time when I needed human connection most. This mistake doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in gradually, almost imperceptibly, until one day you realize that meaningful human contact has become the exception rather than the rule in your life. When I was working, social interactions were built into my daily routine. I had meetings, lunch breaks, hallway conversations, dozens of small moments of connection that I took for granted. After retirement, I assumed my social life would naturally flourish with all my newfound free time. Instead, without the scaffolding of work to support it, my social world began to shrink. At first, it didn't seem like a problem. I told myself I was simply enjoying solitude after years of constant interaction. But solitude, when it stretches from days into weeks into months, transforms into something far more damaging: isolation. And what makes this mistake so insidious is that the more isolated you become, the less energy and confidence you have to reach out and reconnect. Consider the contrasting experiences of Barbara and Helen, both 73-year-old widows who lived in my neighborhood. Barbara's retirement gradually led to increasing isolation. She declined invitations because she didn't feel up to it or didn't want to drive at night. She told herself she was simply being selective about her social engagements, but each refusal made the next invitation less likely to come. Helen approached her social life with the same intentionality she had once applied to her career. She committed to at least one meaningful social interaction every day, sometimes as simple as a coffee with a neighbor, other times a more planned event like a concert with friends. She viewed maintaining relationships as a non-negotiable responsibility, as important as paying her bills or taking her medications. 7 years into retirement, Barbara's world had contracted sharply. When I visited her, I was struck by how her conversation repeatedly returned to the past, to memories of when her life felt fuller. Physical ailments she might once have taken in stride seemed to overwhelm her. Helen, meanwhile, continued to thrive. Despite facing similar health challenges, she remained resilient, engaged, and forward-looking, sustained by the web of relationships she had consciously maintained. The science on this is clear and sobering. Dr. Emma Sapala, Science Director of Stanford University's Center for Compassion and Altruism Research, states, social connection is not a luxury, it's a biological necessity. Research consistently shows that social isolation creates risk factors for mortality comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, making it more dangerous than obesity or physical inactivity. Even more alarming is the research showing how isolation affects cognitive function. Studies from the Harvard Aging Brain Study demonstrate that loneliness accelerates cognitive decline, potentially doubling the risk of dementia. This creates a vicious cycle. As cognitive function declines, maintaining social connections becomes even more challenging. What would I do differently? I would treat my social connections as my most valuable retirement asset, more important than my investment portfolio or retirement account. I would recognize that maintaining meaningful relationships requires intentional effort, especially without the structure of work. Most importantly, I would understand that the time to strengthen these connections is before you desperately need them, because by then it might be too late. Instead of viewing retirement as a time to finally be free of obligations to others, I now see that our obligations to one another are precisely what keep us human, healthy, and whole. The freedom retirement offers is valuable only if we use it to deepen our connections, not retreat from them. Now that I've shared these 6 critical mistakes, retiring based on age rather than readiness, underestimating longevity, neglecting health, losing social networks and professional identity, failing to create purpose and structure, and allowing isolation to take hold, you might be wondering if I'm suggesting that retirement itself is the problem. I'm not. Retirement can be a genuinely rewarding phase of life, rich with meaning, joy, and new possibilities. The problem isn't retirement itself, but rather the way most of us approach it, focused almost exclusively on financial preparation while neglecting the psychological, social, and physical dimensions that ultimately determine its quality. Looking back at my own experience and watching others navigate this transition, I've come to believe that successful retirement isn't about reaching a certain age or accumulating a specific amount of money. It's about creating a life that sustains you on every level: intellectually, emotionally, physically, and socially. If I could go back and do it again, I would reframe retirement not as the end of my productive life, but as the beginning of a new chapter that requires just as much planning, creativity, and intentionality as my career did. I would recognize that the skills that serve me well in my working years, adaptability, relationship building, problem solving, curiosity, are precisely the skills needed to create a fulfilling retirement. Most importantly, I would understand that retirement doesn't mean retreating from life, but rather engaging with it in new and potentially deeper ways. The freedom retirement offers isn't just freedom from workplace obligations, it's freedom to finally become more fully yourself. So if you're approaching retirement or already navigating its challenges, I encourage you to learn from my mistakes. Plan not just for financial security, but for physical health. Cultivate relationships that exist beyond your professional identity. Discover sources of meaning and purpose that will sustain you. Create structure that provides rhythm to your days and goals to work toward. And above all, stay connected to people, to communities, to the world around you. Because at the end of the day, a truly rich retirement isn't measured by the size of your portfolio, but by the depth of your connections, the meaning in your days, and your capacity to continue growing and contributing, regardless of age. Thank you for joining me today. We'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and share one thing you learned today and how you plan to use it in your life. Your thoughts are important to us, so don't hesitate to share them. Reading your comments gives us great motivation and encouragement. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us continue creating good content to inform and inspire you. And if you know someone approaching retirement or struggling with it, consider sharing this video with them. Sometimes the most valuable gift we can give each other is the chance to learn from one another's experiences rather than having to make all the same mistakes ourselves. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.